Okay, so today I want to talk about fretboard mapping. Okay, fretboard mapping is the unlocking and understanding of the neck, so you can understand things like chord and scale construction and stuff like that. Now, there's two types of fretboard mapping that are most common that I can think of. The first one is note names. So, for instance, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. For instance, you know that's an A, you know that's an E, all that kind of stuff, right? That's really useful if you want to be able to read music. So I'll probably cover that in a different video, one that's connected with reading. There's some simple strategies to do that. It's not as hard as people think. But the main one that I'm going to talk, well, the only one that I'm going to talk about today is intervallic fretboard mapping, which is really useful for understanding how things are put together on the neck. And the thing about the guitar is it's not an obvious instrument like the piano where you can see where all the notes are laid out and understand music theory that way. It is kind of confusing, but then at the same time, the guitar does make a lot of sense from a point of view of intervals, because if I move an interval up by a semitone, by a fret each time, it stays the same, right? We know this from, intervallic shapes that you can move up and down the neck, and we all do that as guitar players, and it's one of the strengths of the instrument. It actually makes things that are quite hard on other instruments fairly easy on the guitar, such as moving through chord changes that move up and down by semitones, for instance. So the guitar does actually have, I think, some advantages in that regard, and intervallic fretboard mapping is probably one of the more simple things you can learn to do on the guitar, and it gets you out of that thing of just thinking of the tabs all the time, but you start to think about, understand how the neck works a bit, and you can construct your own chord voicings and so on, right? And this is something I learned quite early on, and it's always been something that I've been glad that I knew. So the basic concept is we're going to work with chord shapes to start off with, and any chord shape you learn, I want you to learn the constituent intervals, okay? So we're going to start with this very standard stock shape that most people know. This is a C major 7th, if you don't know it. And the intervals in it go root 5th, it's a perfect 5th, root 5th, 7th, and a normal 3rd, which can also be called a 10th, because it's higher than a normal 3rd. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But in terms of what we're doing today, we can just think of that as root 5th, 7th, and 3rd. Now these are all major intervals. The 5th is called a perfect 5th, but let's ignore that for a minute. They all belong to the major scale, which is the bass scale of Western music, right? So they don't need any extra labels to define what they are. They're just root 5th, 7th, 3rd in that order. Now you've got to remember that order, root 5th, 7th, 3rd, because it's not the order you would expect, which should just be 1, 3, 5, 7. If it was like that, it would be this voicing. Okay, but this one has them in a different order: 1, 5, 7, 3. And in fact, on the guitar, you're going to find that's the rule rather than the exception, because often things that have all of the numbers going in a row are actually really hard to play. Requiring stupid stretches like this sort of thing. Ooh. Nobody wants to be doing that. So most common guitar grips have the numbers in a different order. So it's kind of important to know that. But the more you work with what I'm going to show you in a minute, the easier it will be to remember that. This is just a matter of practice. And the more shapes you get to know, the easier this is going to become. So let's start with our major 7th shape, right? So what I would like to do to start off with is to turn this chord from being a major 7th to being a dominant 7th. And to do that, you simply flatten the 7th. So we've got to identify which one the 7th is and turn that major 7th, or major key 7th or normal 7th, into being a minor 7th or flat 7th. Okay, we do that by moving it down by a fret, by a semitone. So, and hopefully you can recognize that as the common bar chord shape for a C7 chord. Maybe I want to make that 3rd a semitone lower as well, turning it into a minor chord. The 3rd, in general, is the note within any given particular key or scale or chord or whatever, which just tells your ear whether it's major or minor. So if I lower that note by a semitone from our normal C7 chord shape, you get C minor 7th, which again hopefully is a familiar shape. Okay, like that. And then again I can flatten the 5th as well and get a minor 7 flat 5, which is this. Okay, another hopefully common and recognizable chord shape. If you don't know these, you probably should. Now there's other things we can do. So for instance, I can lower the third but not the seventh. Fifth, seventh again, and the third goes down by a semitone. Okay, this can be hard to see because of the fingering, right? You know, if I put my little finger down, it's not gonna go that way, so I have to take my fingers off and put them down again. This is a good exercise in technique as well, actually. We do minor, major, seventh, so called because the third is minor, but it also includes a major seventh, the one we would expect to find in the major key. Okay, so that's a lot of information that you can use quite quickly, I think, hopefully, but you will need to grind through all these different combinations. Here's a couple of others. Major 7 with a flat 5 or sharp 11th. So that's the 5th normally. I'm going to make it a flat 5th. We'll call it a flat 5th. It's the same thing as a sharp 11th. You'll see them called both. Or a 7th chord with a flat 5. Slightly more exotic possibilities than the standard 4 chords, major 7th, dominant 7th, minor 7th, and minor 7 flat 5 that you might find in the beginnings of most jazz theory books, right? So I want you to really get used to that. Again, it's 1, 5, 7, 3. If you're not able to do this, crunch through all these combinations and just get used to it. And what we're going to do is any chord shape we take, and it could be something as simple as this D major shape, for instance. Now, a lot of these open position so-called cowboy chords are a little bit harder to work with because they have repetition of the notes. So, for instance, for D major, we have 2 1s. We have 1, 5, 1, and then a 3. But we can easily turn that into a major 7th by making the 1 a semitone lower. And then it's the same as, you know, the one we just had. We can lower these notes and raise them according to what kind of sound we want. Okay? So I'll leave that as an exercise. In the same way, C major goes to C major 7th goes to C major. You can see that the difference is this note, the 7 becomes an octave. Because the 7th is the note just below, the semitone below the octave, right? And you should do this with any chord shape you learn. So ways to find out this information might be difficult at first. I'm going to have to introduce you to the major scale in a second, which is the best way to find out for yourself. But for instance, if I take this major 7th shape, which let's do it in G, and this is a different version of the major 7th. It has the notes in a different order. So now we're going 1, we're going 7, 3, and then 5 is at the top instead of being here. It's a different type of voicing, right? But we can do exactly the same things with it. So if we know where the 7th is, we can lower that to be a dominant 7th, which is kind of related to that bar shape. With some notes missed out, we can, you know, flatten the 3rd again, and this will be your common, well-known, I don't know if you can see that very well, well-known G minor 7 chord shape. And then you can add in, you can flatten the 5th, as well, which gives you half diminished like that. You can also have these other ones as well, minor major 7th, dominant flat 5, that kind of thing, right? You've got those options as well. You obviously have larger chords as well. So here's a simple example: the E dominant ninth. Beg your pardon. Most people know that, hopefully. And then it's just a matter of going right. Okay, that's 1, 3, 7, but then we have this 9 up here. Again, a different order: 1, 3, 7 this time instead of 1, 7, 3. 1, 3, 7. 9 is up here. Flat 9. Raised 9th. Hopefully you all know that one. 7 sharp 9. I could also turn that into a major 7th because this has got a flat 7 in it. This particular chord, because it's a dominant chord. So if I raise it to a 7th, I could also have a major 7 sharp 9. Which is a chord you get sometimes in tunes. Speak No Evil by Wayne Shorter has one of these. Now, when you're working through the more complicated voicings, it's exactly the same process, less familiar voicings even. 3rd, okay, so if I wanted to turn that into a dominant 7th chord, I'd move the 7th down, move the 3rd down as well. Half diminished chord there, right? So, obviously, to get the most out of that, you have to know how to construct chords. The basic 4 basic chords sort of form a nice little group together that you can get just by flattening each note in turn. So the major seventh has a normal third and seventh, a major third and seventh. The dominant seventh flattens the seventh but has a major third still. The minor seventh flattens the third and the seventh. And then the minor 7 flat 5 has a flat third and flat seventh, but also a flat fifth. It's the only one of those four chords with a flat fifth in it. So I'd really spend some time getting used to that. And also you can have some fun with the ninth chords as well, making them into flat nines, sharp nines, and so on. So hopefully you have a way now of getting the most value from your basic chord knowledge. Okay, if you want to go further with this, the main thing to learn is the major scale, okay? And that gives you the key to all the sort of intervals if you learn it in a couple of octaves. So I'm a big fan of learning one octave and then learning another octave rather than thinking of it all as 2 octave positions. So the simple way of doing that is going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. Now if you don't know a major scale shape, hopefully you should all know that one, but you know, perhaps you're in more unfamiliar territory. Perhaps you're up here or something. You don't know that. I would suggest, you know, just doing it by ear. Ma da da ba da ba da da do re mi fa sol la ti do 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1. Just working out that way. Now for a little let's take a C major scale like this. Do re mi fa sol la ti do 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. So we can see 1 3 7 makes a major seventh. Now if I add a little bit, if I could put a fifth in there instead, 1 2 3 4 5 1 5 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 5 7. Now I've got this third on top, and this is why we call it a tenth, because I go 1 2 3 4 5 6 7, then I keep going 8 9 10. That's a tenth. Tenth, by the way, is one of the most useful sounding intervals on the guitar because it always kind of seems to take up more space than you'd expect for just one interval. You put the seventh back in, you put the fifth back in, and you have a complete major seventh chord. Now you'll notice some other things just as a final point. You can obviously flatten the seventh, and you can flatten the third, flatten the fifth, but then you can also raise the seventh till it becomes an octave, which I've shown you. If you raise a major third, it becomes a perfect fourth. That's most commonly used on a dominant chord, so a chord with, if we start from our basic major seventh voicing, we flatten the seventh, and then we raise the fourth, we get this. This is known as a 7 sus4 chord. If we go the other way, minor, then we get a second, we get that, right? Okay. Now if we do the same thing with the seventh, we can flatten it once to that, and we flatten it again. If we flatten it again, it goes from being a flat 7 to being a 6, and we get a C major seventh. The vital thing when you're doing any of this fretboard mapping is to notice the intervallic position of the semitones, by which I mean if you're going up a scale, most of the gaps are whole tones, or 2 frets, but some of them, such as the one between the third and the fourth, is a half step, and the 7 and the 1 is another half step. So if you remember those 2 half steps, 7 1, 4 third. These are the most sensitive and kind of important notes in the diatonic major scale for creating harmonic movement. Okay, as an aside, but in terms of chord construction, you know that a third can't be sharp; it becomes a fourth. And if I, raise a seventh up by a half step, it doesn't become a sharp seventh. Well, I mean, it does if you want to go deep into theory, but actually, for our purposes, it's just an octave. It just goes up 1. Okay, hopefully that's covered it. It's still, 17-minute video or whatever, 60 minutes, whatever it is when I edit it down. But I just want you to kind of have a good grounding in intervallically how the neck works. You are going to find that there is some confusion with the B and G string, that the shapes change. Some people retune their guitar so they don't have to deal with that. But to me, it's a sort of feature rather than a bug, because I love to use open strings. So that means that, for instance, when we change the shape of the same chord voicing from string to string, it will change. Yeah, those 2 chords are exactly the same, but the shapes look different. If you haven't done this kind of work before, I would say just changing shapes and recognizing the intervals and then moving them around is one of the most effective and powerful bits of practice you can do.